set up our networks based on what we've talked about so far, our ingress, our egress, and those types of things. What we do is we apply filters to read and analyze what's taking place on our network. Because remember, unless the perpetrator or suspect sits physically on our machine, there's going to be network traffic or some type of network packets that we have to analyze. So when you look at the filters, this is an example of what we have. We have an equal, a not equal, a greater than, a less than, a greater than or equal to, and a less than or equal to. So we can set up all these different types of filters to compare what's in the network traffic. Now we'll go through this at the end when I show a demonstration of how you would analyze some network traffic. So where I want to think you to think about this is, we've talked about network segmentation and isolation. So what I want you to do is, each one of your segments you would have monitoring in place, because we already talked about intrusion detection, those types of things in the last actual webinar. But when you have that monitoring in place, you're going to analyze the network traffic. So by using these advanced features of Wireshark, you can filter and look for specific things. Remember, we talked early on in the webinar series about internal honeypots and decoys or triggers. So we put a trigger machine in that the IP address should never be there. You can use this top filter, IP.source or just IP.addr for address equal to the address of that filter or decoy. If anything's returned, you know you've got malware or some type of suspicious activity on that segment. So this is the power of what we've been doing and bringing it all together. All right. So what's the display filter types? These are different things you can do. You got the Boolean, you got MAC addresses, you got IPv4, IPv6, even IPX for those who've worked with Novell and those types of things. But again, there's different ways of doing the different types of things. What works for you will be dependent on your security policy and how you actually set it up. And we'll show some of these because it's showing us here in the Boolean how we can set up a send flag and actually look and see if the flag is set. So if you remember from your flags, we had 6 main flags. We had urgent, act, push, reset, send, and fin. So this is how we actually would display those in our filters, and we'll explain that coming up. The logical operators, where we have ands, ors, exclusive ors, and nots. Substrings, where we have the source Ethernet address or the MAC address, those types of things. So again, there's an entire filtering language here. And what you can do is you can actually go into Wireshark's help or tutorial, and it has very good references on how to use these, as well as in the Udemy course that I have. I teach you some of the ones that I'll show you here today in more detail. Filter expressions, this is what we talked about. So if we got IP, it tells us immediately what's available under the IP protocol. This is the power we have right here. So we know IP greater than equal to equal. So again, just by selecting it in the preferences of the tool, we can identify what's available based on that protocol, which is powerful stuff. And how do you determine a filter name? Well, Wireshark makes it really easy. So if you look here, I've got the send flag set. Down here in the bottom, right here I'm pointing to now, to set the send flag is tcp.flags.send equal to 1 byte. So your flag's going to be tcp.flags.send equals 1, because right there it is. It's a binary 1, right, value in this actual network trace. And there's our 6 flags: urgent, act, push, reset, send, and fin. Remember, we said part of protocol analysis, part of intrusion analysis as well, and intrusion response is understanding what flags are set in the network traffic, because hackers will craft and create different ones, and we need to be able to identify that. Session content. So what we do is, once we find information in our network trace, we can go from the 3-way handshake. So if you see here in this packet 43, send, SYNAC, act. That's the 3-way handshake. So that's connecting to, in this case, FTP, port 21, file transfer protocol. It's connecting there with the 3-way handshake. And it gets a response of the banner. This is that 3COM, 3C daemon FTP server version 2.0. So remember, from an attacker standpoint, I would look at this version of 3COM daemon and look on the internet using the techniques we've talked about previously, and I would see if I could find a vulnerability in that. If I could find a vulnerability in that, then I would look for a weakness. What else we've got? We've got what a user typed in, Kevin, and the password, Kevin C. So we've got the actual username and password in clear text. This is why we say never use clear text protocols unless you have to and you have strong authentication on the endpoints, right? So that's showing you how it actually works. Now this is looking at it in the actual traffic windows, but I can actually look at the stream all at one time. And this is the nice thing about Wireshark, because I can just right click any one of these packets, hit follow the stream, and this is what I get. So for you to understand this, this is the entire sequence of that session from the time the SYNACT, the ACK went until the data or the closing of the connection in this case. So in the blue is the server. So the server responded with the 3COM, 3C daemon, FTP server version 2.0. User Kevin, username okay, need password. So that's telling you the server is that your user is okay. And then the password, Kevin C, and then the server responds and says user logged in. In this case, I just closed the connection. So probably just a hacker getting that step we call enumeration, where we're trying to see what the users are and those types of things. So again, it's just another method of how we can analyze what the network traffic is doing in our network, which gives us the powerful capability to identify intrusions. Then we can go into interfaces and customize our interfaces. So this is just Wireshark showing our interfaces, showing us our IP addresses, where these are IPv6 at. If you click on those in the Wireshark interface, they will turn and show you the IP4 address, all right? So it'll toggle from the IPv4 to the IPv6 address if you click on it. And then if you click details, this is what it gives you. So now we have the interface. It's a local interface, the name of the interface, the IP address, and we're saying capture packets in promiscuous mode. Now the previous lecture I explained this. What you do is you capture packets in promiscuous mode because you want to turn off the address filtering. So you're going to turn off the MAC address filtering. That's what capture packets in promiscuous mode means, all right? Once you've done that, all the network traffic will be received. So then you've got actual here, you can set up a capture file, give it a name, even do a capture filter, as I said, but I don't recommend that because unfortunately the capture filters will actually not collect all traffic. Where this would be good is to set up a capture filter for your decoy or trigger, and then if you ever got any packets, any size or anything of a file that you can remote into, you know you've had a compromise. What's nice is I can give it a file name here, use multiple files and give it a size or minutes and tell it to rotate. It will automatically rotate the files. So I have the capability to just run this thing 24/7, let it rotate files and go back and look at the files. If an incident or intrusion takes place, I can go back and look at the files and track down exactly what has taken place. So when you think about the WannaCry ransomware, you remember WannaCry mainly used 445, the Microsoft server service for SMB, server message block. So because it used 445, I could actually go back to all my network traffic if I was monitoring it and see when it first spread. Because we know if the user clicked, the first thing it does is infect the system and then it's going to spread or attempt to spread from there. If I'm looking on the segment and I see port 445 traffic, especially if I see any traffic at all to the decoy or trigger, I could actually go back and identify when the intrusion occurred. Extremely important for understanding how far you got to go in your backups if you do have to go to backups because you don't want to pay the ransom. And remember, we recommend, even though most security experts, a lot of them today, are telling you pay the ransom, I'm still going to tell you not to pay the ransom. Just go back and restore from backup because the user should never get your data encrypted anyway. But we covered that in segmentation isolation. Okay. Now, what I can do is when I capture, I can use the MAC address name, so media access control. This is what it's on. So now I'd have the manufacturer's name of the MAC address as Wireshark interprets it. One problem with that is sometimes it can cause confusion. So sometimes you want the actual MAC address itself. So in the bottom one, I'm showing you how if I turn the MAC name off, I can actually pick up the actual MAC name traffic, which will be the actual MAC address itself. For those you don't know, the first 3 sets of numbers or 6 numbers is the vendor ID. And the second 6 numbers are the actual address of the network card. We also have this powerful thing called statistics. What statistics is, it allows me to grab information and run statistics. I can get a summary, a protocol hierarchy. So think now back to, again, WannaCry. We know WannaCry is server message block. So I can pull that network trace up, look at the protocol hierarchy, and if I see SMB all over the place, go into external addresses and those types of things, go to the source. I know that's where my infection is, and I've got to isolate it and, cut off patient 0, as we've been saying. And then we look at the conversations. If you remember, we kind of did this a little bit in the last webinar, if you've seen it. If not, when you go through the series, you can look at it. But we talked about analyzing the actual traffic between the two endpoints. These are conversations and endpoints. So I can get the specific information for our analysis, and I can even graph it. So it gives us a graph to visualize the number of packets in time. So I can see when the peak of the infection is and when the infection started and when the infection starts to taper off. That is, we've mitigated it, we've isolated it, we've controlled it, right? And I can get specific responses. And this is what it looks like. This shows you the actual capture, the Wireshark format it is, the packet size limit, normal 65,535, when the first packet was received, when the last packet was received, right? The elapsed time and the capture, and then the number of packets captured, number of packets displayed, and it gives you the information, including average packet size. This is another thing. If I get a typical attack we use in hacking called fragmentation, I'll see lots and lots of little 1-byte packets. That's not normal traffic. So when I see lots and lots of 1 byte of traffic, I would see this down here when I'm analyzing the statistics of that capture. So again, powerful ways we can analyze this stuff. Protocol hierarchy. That's what I was talking about, where you can get your TCP, get your HTTP, user, it'd be network by its name service, domain name service, those types of things. You can actually pick up the entire protocol hierarchy just by looking at this one statistic. So when you look here, it shows you exactly what you've got. Of course, frames, everything starts with frames in Ethernet, everything's encapsulated in Ethernet, and then most everything's encapsulated in IP, right? And it shows you exactly the bytes, right? The end packets, the end bytes, and the bits, and those types of things. So it gives you all the information to analyze the network traffic, including if you see JPEG files, GIF files, right, media types, those types of things. So very powerful features we can use in this free tool. Remember, it's free, so all it requires you to do is to capture. So even if you got a Unix or Linux system that doesn't have a GUI and you can't use Wireshark, you can capture it using TCP dump, which is the command line one that we use in those environments. And we even snoop with Solaris, pretty much anything you can think of. And Wireshark, as long as it captures in the PCAP, or what we call a WinPCAP or a libPCAP, it captures in that format. Wireshark can read it. So you can capture the data, pull it off that machine, put it on an off the site or an isolated machine, and analyze the network traffic. Again, a powerful capability. And these are conversations. So this shows you conversations between these two addresses. How many bytes they sent, how many bytes went A to B, right? How many packets went A to B, and those types of things. So what this identifies, if you get a lot of packets, like here, 301 packets, that type of stuff, but they're only in one direction and they're not coming in the other direction, that's usually a denial of service attack. Remember, the way a denial of service attack works, I'm going to spoof the IP address. And by spoofing an IP address, I attack somebody, but I don't want the packets coming back to me. So you would see that. You see all these packets coming in and all this information, but you'd see no sessions. You'd see no communications because the packet never finishes. The three-way handshake never finishes. If we do the send flood attack, those types of things, we never complete the three-way handshake. We can identify it when we look in these types of statistics of conversations. And then your endpoints. As I said, you can go specifically endpoint to endpoint, and now you can figure out what packets the generating packets on your network. And this is where you can identify that WannaCry infected machine, because I've got one machine here and it's going out to an address like somewhere else, a broadcast address or something else, those types of things, and it's got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of packets. I know it's probably an infected machine. Why would a machine be generating 10 to 20 times more than a normal machine would? So again, this is how we can do it. So if I didn't want to see the names, I just take this selection, name resolution off, and then it would show me the actual MAC addresses of these targets. Okay, And I said the graphs we can define. This one I'm looking at HTTP, and it's showing me what time did I get most HTTP packets, right? Again, we use this to identify flooding attacks, denial of service, malware infections when the malware is trying to phone home. We can identify all these types of things. Plus, what I like to look at with it too is if I know I've done good segmentation isolation, and I should never see, say, secure shell in a segment, if I pull a graph up for SSH and anything's in that segment, I know I've been compromised, right? So again, I could see it the other way too, but this is a quick way to graph it and look at it and use it in reports. And since we're talking about intrusion response and incident response, you want reports. So this is how you, all these techniques we've showed with statistics is how you would get the actual information for the actual response. Wide range of statistics, as I said, lots of them. One of my favorites here is HTTP. You go into HTTP requests, and it'll show you all of the HTTP requests, your endpoint, all this different things. So when you look, there's a lot of features we can do within Wireshark and examine different types of things. So here we go, HTTP request, it's right there, right? Once it requests, it does information back and forth. So what is an incident? Very important that you have to understand what an incident is to be able to do incident and an intrusion response. An incident is any event that violates an organization's implied or explicit policies from security. So what that means is if it's not criminal in nature, it's got to be a violation of policy. Now what I'm explaining there is everything starts with your security policy. And this is why starting off in the first webinar I talked about your policies, how we identify everything we're going to do in the architecture in the organization. And this is because if there's no policy preventing what was done, therefore there's no violation of policy, there's no incident unless it's criminal in nature. And we just got some examples here, and I'm not going to cover these because they're kind of self-explanatory. Look at your security policy. Every one of you should have a security policy, and that policy should say what the user's allowed to do and not to do. And any violation of that is a violation of security policy. When it's a violation of security policy, it's an incident. If it's criminal in nature, then it's almost always an incident, okay? So violations, when they occur, we identify it and take corrective action, right? Is it a policy issue? Do we have a policy in place or do we need a new policy? When we call this type of thing, it's management of our risk, right? We talked about this before. We have two methods we can deploy against risk, policies and procedures or technology. Policies and procedures are we ask the users not to do it, and technology is we deploy safeguards in to make sure they don't do it. And that's kind of what a firewall can do, those types of things. We're saying, okay, you're not allowed to do this, and we're going to configure the firewall where it helps make it harder for you to do it as well, or blocks you completely, right? And violations of policies and procedures can be used to terminate someone. But that's why in a response, we're going to make sure we collect the evidence in a forensically sound manner. And we're not doing the forensics here, but you understand the information about it. And as long as you maintain a chain of custody, which is a document that establishes when you started the evidence collection and what you did and step by step, that's enough to meet the needs of a forensics investigation, at least the initial parts, what we call the first responder. Evidence may look like a violation of corporate policy, but it may actually reveal criminal activity. Important thing to remember, if it reveals criminal activity, do not go directly to law enforcement. Go to whoever's your supervisor or your legal department. If you have that, let them notify law enforcement. It's not our job to do the legal side. Make sure legal team or somebody else does that, right? As usually a network administrator, network security operations center analyst, those types of things, you're not going to be handling the report of criminal activity above your command or your organization. Okay, so we've got some guidance for us. You should have a cert, some form of a cert, a first, somebody. And what that is, who do you have in your organization right now? If you have an incident, who do you report to it? And that's one of the most important things of your intrusion handling and your incident handling. Right now, if you had an incident, does every one of you on this webinar, do every one of you know who to report to and the process and the procedures for that? If the answer is no, that's where you need to start at. You got to make sure everybody has that capability and knows what the actual proper response procedures are. And this usually is in your incident response plan. So go read your incident response plan if you don't know that. And if you don't have an incident response plan, you need that, because based on everything we've already talked about, we know users are going to click. And if they click, they're going to cause an infection. And if they cause an infection, we're going to have to respond to it. So what we want to do is establish this methodology for you to understand how we would go about this in a forensics type of process. So we're going to plan, preserve, identify, harvest, scrutinize, document, and report. So this is what I want you to start thinking about, because intrusion handling and incident handling in response, you need to start processing it as if it's going to be criminal in nature. We process all evidence the same, right? We have a saying, let the facts tell the story. Do not look at the evidence with any other view other than the facts. What are the facts telling you? Okay? So the plan. You have to have this thoroughly tested and well thought out, documented and published. This is what I was saying. If you can't go right now and find your incident response plan in your organization, you need to create one, all right? And what you should do is make it part of your disaster recovery plan, right? Different things like that. I was working with one country and they had major weather and a flood. And there really was nothing to deal with. What do you do when all this actual area is flooded? So what they did is, as many people as could, took computers, put them in their cars, drove up onto the top of a mountain. So they had, that was their response plan, their disaster response, their disaster recovery, because they didn't expect to get a flood, but as many people as could loaded machines into their actual cars and drove them atop of a hill until the flood subsided. And it saved a lot of data that way, right? So again, you have to start thinking about worst case scenario. There's a lot of incidents that happen, and you got to have them part of your disaster recovery plan. And it should tell you exactly what do you do with your IT related assets when these disasters strike. Preserve. If you don't properly handle the evidence, it can defeat the strongest evidence. I'm not going to go into cases, but some of you might know of a famous case in America where DNA, which is the strongest evidence you can have, but the crime scene and the evidence was handled poorly, and the DNA evidence was not enough to convict beyond a reasonable doubt a person of a double homicide, okay? That's what we're talking about here. You got to handle the evidence in a forensically sound manner, otherwise your evidence will call into a question. And remember, most of the court systems, if it's a capital crime or capital punishment type crime, it's got to be justified, would be beyond a reasonable doubt for the conviction of a guilty verdict. Very hard to do if poor handling of the evidence. So what do we do to collect evidence in a forensically sound manner? Write blocker. For those you don't know, if I'm going to access something, I got to make sure I don't write to it and change it, because anything writes to it and changes, that can actually tamper with the evidence. Now with phones, we accept the fact that phones are constantly dynamic and changing, same with SSD drives, so they're a little bit more tricky. But again, as long as I can do an integrity check, and what that is, I create a hash or some type of SHA, some type of hashing algorithm. There's a bunch of things out there that do that, and I get an integrity check of that. So I'll give you an example. When I was talking about those log files, so let's say we have in our organization, we have a log file set up. We take that log file, and what we do is we take a hash or integrity check of it anytime we copy and save it. And this can be done very easy with software in cron jobs and Unix, Linux, those types of things. So as long as I have that integrity check of that file, as long as no matter how often that gets opened, if I later test that and I verify that that hash, that integrity check still is the same, that means I verified that the data hasn't changed in that file. Very important. And then we got documentation. We call it from inception to disposal. Take it from the time you start to the time you dispose of it. Okay? That type of thing is what we call an actual chain of custody. And from the time, another term that law enforcement likes to use, cradle to grave. Keep cradle to grave accountability for that tool. Okay? As I said, approach all investigations with an open mind. We have two types of evidence. We have inculpatory, which is incriminating evidence. We have exculpatory, which is non-incriminating evidence. Remember, at any time, you're not looking for whether the person's guilty or innocent. You're going to just present the facts as you discover them as you do your investigation and handle the incident and the intrusion. It also means you have to understand hiding techniques. So this is where you have to understand, if you get a sophisticated perpetrator, they're going to understand steganography. They're going to understand alternate data streams. They're going to understand these other ways to hide information in plain sight. If you're not familiar with steganography or alternate data streams, by all means research and read up on them, or connect with me on LinkedIn and I can give you references about those as well. Alternate data streams have been around since the time of NTFS and Windows, and a lot of people still don't know much about them. Harvest. How to extract the evidence that's identified? Well, I got to understand how to discover the evidence. The key here is sometimes the tool will do it, sometimes they won't. They won't. I was just doing phone forensics over this past weekend, and while I was doing the forensics, the tool got some of the information, but most of the information I had to manually extract from the device, and that happens a lot of times, especially with the newest advances in the tools and those types of things. We got to extract it manually. Remember what I said in the first early stages of the webinar. The process that we follow as we explain building a CyberWarrior here is the same one I've used for 25 years. The only difference that's changed is the tools and the targets. So that's what I was finding yesterday. The latest phones, if targets, those types of things, it's much more difficult to extract information. That was evidenced when the FBI reached out to try to get assistance against an iPhone that was pin locked. So when what we call that is obstructed. When it's obstructed, then we have to figure out how to get it off, because if it's obstructed, very difficult, as we discovered with the FBI asking for help. Scrutinize. Isolate the evidence information. As I said, always let the facts tell the story. Never assume guilt. So the thing here is, too, if you're investigating somebody and when you look at it, you know who this person is, you recuse yourself. Recuse yourself, which is remove and excuse yourself, so combine the two words, recuse, in the legal terms. Recuse yourself from the investigation, because if you don't recuse yourself, somewhere down the road, somewhere, it's probably going to come back and you will have problems with that. So make sure you get out of the actual process of the investigation. Document. Evidence collected. Evidence tags are validated and verified by the two-person rule. Make sure the integrity. Check and recheck the process. Repeat the process requires exceptional documentation. So what you got to do is you got to do this over and over again, all right? It's like anything else. To be good at incident response or intrusion response, I needed to perform this over and over again until I get it right. And report. Same as we said before. The showcase for you as an investigator to your client is to deliver a professional and detailed report, right? The report should methodically state what was done. Remember to expand at each step and give details as to why the step was done in that manner. Ensure that the report is objective. Make sure that you maintain these are the facts. And as it says there in the last bullet, you only offer an opinion if you're asked for it. All right, so that is intrusion handling, intrusion response, and incident response. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to discuss a methodology. So the whole premise here is you've done the process, everything we've talked about throughout the CyberWarrior webinar series. You've got your ingress, your inbound, your egress, your outbound. You've got all the filtering set up. You got your decoys, you got your triggers, you've got your segmentation, you've got your isolation, and something's triggered, something's responded, or something where you have some form of a potential incident. So based on that, what we do is we have to go and investigate, and that's what intrusion and incident response is all about, investigating it. Part of that investigating is analyzing it. So it's picking up kind of what we discussed before and picking it up, because in the previous webinar we set up Snort with 2 clicks of the mouse. using the Network Security Toolkit, and by doing that, it gave us the capability to analyze those segments that we've talked about defining and identifying to isolate for our networks. All right, so now what we do is validation. So this is your incident handling. You got to validate the incident, you got to report on the incident, determine what's taking place, and you got to mitigate the incident, and then have a response based on your incident response plan, and then recover from the incident, and then feedback of what we call lessons learned. And I kind of just wanted to explain that's the process. Now, to expand on these would take a lot of time, but as long as you have this concept of the process, you can research and expand on these more on your own, because I want to get to the actual process and methodology and then show it in action against a particular network trace, and then leave some time for questions, since it seems like every time I finish we don't have much time left and I don't get any questions. So I'm hoping I'll get questions, and feel free to ask questions of any other webinars too if you've thought about them and you've seen one and you have a question to come back to. And the feedback, what we like to call that, is lessons learned. What we do right? What we do wrong? Was it not enough people? Was it the fact that the people are not trained properly? How can we improve? How to improve the process? Important here, never criticize people, criticize the process. Always look at the process, figure out what could be improved with the process. And you can't just throw people at a problem, because they have to be educated and have a lot of knowledge and those types of things. Okay. So this is your methodology I want you to practice. And this is what I tell people in an investigation. Look at what's suspicious. So what we're doing here is, remember, some user, something's happened. We've had an indication that one of our machines has been triggered. So the first thing we do is we grab that network traffic. If we're not monitoring network traffic, we made a mistake already. Well, we always want to have network traffic monitoring going on. So we pull the network traffic up and we look for something suspicious in the network traffic. And we're going to go through this process here in a minute. Then we look for open ports. Why? Because the port wasn't open. I don't care about all the traffic going to closed ports. They have to have an open port to get a session. They have to have an open port to get data, right? And then that's the next step, is the data. Is there data in the packets, right? And then we look at sessions. This is predominantly with TCP. UDP is a little bit trickier because it's UDP. So we have to look a little bit deeper for UDP type stuff, because we can't tell the UDP traffic as easy as we can TCP. Then we look at the sessions. And this is that session like I showed you in the one image where we had the FTP traffic. From the time the FTP traffic, the port was opened, till the time that the session was closed, and we had the username password. So we look for that. Why? Because we're trying to see if we have signs of compromise. If we have signs of compromise, we know we have to get in and examine and figure out what's taking place. Most importantly, what did the attacker do? What were they able to do when they compromised the system, and what data went through those sessions? Okay, so let's do it. So what I've got here is I've got a Wireshark trace. Okay, so what happens is with Wireshark, I get all these network packets. So if you look here down at my bottom, it says I got 581 packets. So not too bad, not that many. So I'm going to look for suspicious. Well, I'm here to tell you, if we see lots of resets, that's suspicious. We got some red traffic, a lot of red traffic that could be suspicious or not. And we start looking through and some resets, that type of stuff. So yeah, it's a little bit suspicious, but the key here is, and a lot of people miss it, is right there. What's that source address? So when you look at packet 1 here, what is the source address? 224. For those of you listening, 224 is, anybody know? 224 is multicast. The IPv4 usable address range stops at 223. I should not be in a multicast source address connecting port 80. So that's a send packet coming to port 80, right? So all this 224 is in red because it's multicast traffic, all right? So we're going through our methodology. So remember, our first step of our methodology was suspicious. The second step of our methodology is open ports. And this is where we use the powerful filters of Wireshark. So we do TCP.flags.send, because think about it, the three-way handshake. When I send in a packet to a port that is open, the response from the open port is a SYN and an ACK flag to find all the open ports in the actual Wireshark trace, I just put in a filter that looks for the SYN and the ACK flag set. So I set a Boolean filter. So then I do TCP dot flags dot ACK equals 1. Okay? And if it doesn't turn green, I check my syntax, and I had 2 C's, but now you see, when it's green, that means the filter is good syntax, and you can apply it. To apply it, I can hit enter, or just click this arrow key here. Now, this entire network trace that had 581 packets, only 4%, see that? 26 packets responded to the query. And this address, this 224 address that you're seeing responded to, should have never made it to my network. When we talked early in the webinar series about ingress or inbound filtering, we talked about a concept called bogon. Bogon's a bogey. Bogey means an address that should never be received as a source address from outside my network. In this case, this 224 address should have never been received. Since it was, I can go to the network team of this organization and say you're not following ingress best practices. More importantly, you're not doing bogon filtering, okay? So now we've got that. So everything's good there. Now what we do is we look for the data. So we clear this filter, and we apply the data filter. And if you may recall from our TCP lesson, the push flag represents data, right? Equals a 1. Because if it's just open, doesn't mean anything left my environment. But the process would be from that open, I'm just saving us a little bit of time here, from that open query, the process would be to go through those open ports and make a list of all the ports that are open, right? And then you know the ports that were open in that segment. But if I look at the data, these are the ports that not only are open, these are the ports that actually had data in them. And there's going to be more than before because there's sessions, right? So how do I get the sessions? Well, everybody has a different preference when you come to this, right? My preferred way is just to scroll through and look down here. And if you can see here, I've got an NSA.gov as my source address. That's interesting. With everything that's going on, the NSA don't usually think they're hacking us, but well, who knows? Okay, so when you see this and you look at it, all these packets have data, right? But what's the key here is when I've got data and it's going to port 80, HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, as we're seeing here, when I see that, what that means is it's going to port 80 and trying to get a session. And when I see this HTTP 1.1404, that means the session failed. It was not successful, okay? So I could go through here step by step every one of these packets, but there's another trick that I can show you. Because remember, once we've got the suspicious, we've done that, we've done the open ports, we've done the, suspicious, the open ports, the data, and now we've looked at some sessions. These are all sessions here, right? So now we can manually look at the sessions, or as I said, scroll down through here, but I already know 404s aren't of importance, or I can use another great filter. And we had another great filter that we love, and that filter is called frame contains. What that is give me any frame that contains the string that I'm giving it, right? And once again, if it's red, means go check your syntax. Early in the morning here in California, still typing slow. Frame contains 200 OK. So when you see it's green, correct? When it's green, that means it's ready to be applied. The filter matches. So now I apply. So out of all those packets, I only have this many that were accepted by the target, in this case, on port 80. Now, frame contains 200 OK is mainly just looking for the actual port 80 traffic. So if I right-click this and follow the stream to bring up the session, see what happened? Here's this client, right? This is what the attacker sent. So when you look at what the attacker sent, they sent scripts // in Unicode format, WinNT, System32, command.exe, and the problem is right there. The server responded with 200 OK. So this happens because the front-end application in front of the server, or however they got there, did not properly filter or sanitize input, all right? course, we've got IIS 5, which that's the dead giveaway that we're in trouble because it's ancient. And then we've got a directory. So this is signs of compromise. So in your report, you're going to say, yep, the refer NSA.gov, which pretty sure it wasn't NSA.gov. This pretended to be NSA.gov. Since I created all these, I know that. It wasn't really the NSA. But you could make the case that today it is the NSA. But anyway, so you see that, or you can make it look like the NSA or like Russia or anybody else. So when you see that, now you see we have signs of compromise, all right? That's it. So now we have that. Remember, we had like 4 other ones. So we'll get to those, and hopefully you have some questions here in our last webinar. So when I clear that, and I just go back and I get my frame contains 200 OK, and I go to the next one. And I look at it. Follow stream. Same thing, same type of thing, 200 OK, NSA.gov. So I had 2 attacks like that. Let's look at the next one. Frame contains 200 OK, and apply. Now I go to 114. And I got the same thing. So this is all the same thing. So to save some time, I'm going to go and look at one more data point, and then we'll turn it over and wrap it up. And then the last one, get Windows NT system command.exe, and that looks like a buffer overflow there. And there it is, and it's a buffer overflow. So this changed from a Win System32 attack to this is actually a buffer overflow type of attack that was accepted. All these dots is some type of characters for a buffer overflow, right? So then the last thing I'm going to show, I go back to my data, because that was just to look at all the ones that had web traffic. So now I need to go back to my data packets. So the nice thing is you can save these filters so you don't have to actually write them in again. So once you do this, I recommend you do that. And now I'm just going to look at the data. As I told you, my preferred method is like this. I just go through and I do it. Yeah? Different things you can do. And I just look until I see stuff that is of interest. So when I go to different packets, all right, this is all your Windows, by the way, SMB. This is why WannaCry and all that stuff worked, because you see it's a bunch of Windows net bias traffic, and Windows always, it's a chatty protocol, and that's the one I'm looking for right there. So now I got a push flag here at 233, and look at what it's pushing. This one's encrypted, but I can at least see Metasploit.exe. So those you don't know, Metasploit's a hacker exploit type of tool. So in this session, they're using Metasploit, but it's encrypted. And that's all this data down here. And then finally, FTP. So FTP there, all that type of stuff. So this is another sign of compromise. So we've got 5 or 6 different compromises in this network trace. But the key here is this. Remember, just follow this methodology for network traffic, right? Suspicious, open ports, data, sessions, signs of compromise. And that's how you can do your intrusion analysis and do your response, because your response is going to be based on your policy, and then write up your report to say what happened. And remember your lessons learned. What can we do better? Was it a segment problem? Was it a team problem? What can we do better to make our organizations more secure? And we're ready for questions. I'll put up my last slide like I'll always do, and we'll turn it over to see if there's any questions. And there's my last slide with my LinkedIn information, my website, the csiswat.com, where we're doing custom pen testing platforms there. You can check it out. My advanced penetration testing course for EC Council, and Udemy course, and Pluralsight course. And I've also got an advanced network defense course as well through EC Council, as well as a core concepts course, which is TCP/IP, Unix, Linux, and virtualization. So feel free to contact me on LinkedIn, ask me any questions anytime you're watching the webinar or anything else, and thanks for listening. And I'll turn it back over to you, Rand.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I guess that wraps up the CyberWarrior certification program. We'll keep it open for a couple minutes. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask, you guys can just go ahead and unmute yourselves or type it in the chat box.
Yeah, I finished a few minutes early for once, so I was hoping to get questions.
If nothing comes up now, if there are any questions while you guys are reviewing notes for the exam, you guys can just go ahead and also send those over to either me, Paul, or Kevin, and I'll try to help you as best as we can. Again, the recordings are going to be uploaded. If you have any issues accessing them, please let me know. We're also going to send out an email to all attendees for instructions to have access to our management system for the exams. I'm just going to leave it open for about 2 more minutes. The exam is open book. Is the exam open book, Kevin?
Yes, that's what Paul said in the last webinar.
Oh, okay. That's it.
Which is reality. I mean, you're always going to look stuff up. I don't know why people are still insistent on rote memorization.
I agree. Okay.
No questions, huh?
No questions. All right. Well, I guess that wraps it up. If anybody sends me anything, I'll make sure to forward them over to you.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you very much again, Kevin. Really appreciate all the work you've put into this. It's been a really excellent series of webinars.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks.